Today's module 2 is focusing on academic integrity and ethical use of AI, where we seek to understand the policy, misconduct, and responsible scholarship. So my name is Dr. Muringa, and I'll give you a bit background of what I've done. I'm from the Faculty of Arts and Design. I've participated in the development of the UKZN AI policy, and also a former member of the UKZN AI task force. To date, I've trained over 1,200 academics and researchers in AI and AI use. I'm also an advisor to deans and academic leaders on the use of AI, particularly in thesis examination. I've published over 30 journal articles in Q1 and Q2 range. So our presentation is basically categorized into 4 sections that we're going to be focusing on. Number 1, we'll be talking about understanding academic integrity, then DUT plagiarism and AI policy highlights, and the ethical use of AI tools. So those are the aspects that we're going to be focusing on, then we conclude. Right, so first things first, we need to understand the concept of academic integrity itself. So the basic definition of academic integrity is the commitment to the fundamental values of number 1, honesty, transparency, fairness, responsibility, and courage in all scholarly work and conduct. But it is underpinned by 5 key pillars, right? The first one is that it is the foundation of scholarship, where it ensures that academic credentials, qualifications, and research findings are genuinely earned, right, with the people and everybody that is involved in the university. Then the second pillar is that it builds institutional trust, where it upholds the credibility and a reputation of the university and all the qualifications that the university offers. Then the other pillar is that it reflects personal character. For you as an academic and as a scholar, you need to demonstrate a scholarly commitment, ethical commitment to your work, so that we regard you as a professional person, as a professional academic. Another thing is that it protects intellectual property, right, where you acknowledge the original contribution of a specific individuals or other researchers and creators in terms of critical thinking and knowledge-driven academic community. But lastly, it also supports the aspect of fairness, where it ensures that all work is evaluated fairly, and that some other students or other scholars are not gaining an unfair advantage, right? But let's now talk about the types of academic misconduct. So I have 4 types of academic misconducts that I want to share with you. The first one is plagiarism. The most common type of academic misconduct is plagiarism, where it refers to presenting someone's work or words or work as your own without proper attribution, right, including copying text, paraphrasing without citation. That's plagiarism. Then the issue of fabrication as well, where you inventing up data or information that do not exist, for example citation, experiments, and you present those as genuine, whereas you have fabricated those. Then the other aspect is falsification, where you manipulating or altering or selecting or omitting some type of research data for the purposes of driving a particular agenda that you need to drive. For example, the issue of images, you might choose to crop images or Photoshop images for the purposes of misrepresenting information or distorting the true outcome of the academic investigation. Lastly is the issue of collusion, where you are working or colluding with others, right, to on an individual assessment without permission, you including sharing answers, jointly completing assignments, or knowingly assisting other students to gain an unfair advantage. So all these are the types of academic misconduct that are covered in the DUT policy and that we need to be aware of. But as you know that each and every misconduct has consequences to it. So there are 2 types of consequences that we need to talk about. The first one is, I'll categorize them into 2: institutional consequences and professional consequences. So in institutional consequences, we have 5 key aspects that we need to focus on, that we need to familiarize ourselves with, and also the professional consequences. There are 5 that we need to familiarize ourselves with. So number 1 is that if in terms of institutional consequences, there is mark deductions. You have a 0, you get a 0 if your piece of work or assessment is regarded to have been gained through misconduct or falsification or collusion, right? Number 2 is the repeat of the module. You might even be asked to repeat the module because you have failed the entire module, right? Then number 3 is the referral to formal disciplinary for of the academic formal disciplinary hearing before the DUT disciplinary committee, and this happens a lot. You need to face the disciplinary and explain and justify yourself why you have engaged in that kind of conduct. Then also you might be suspended or excluded from the university in case of serious repeat offenses, or a permanent academic record connotation where that offense will appear on your academic record for the rest of your life, and this will have consequences when you are professional endeavors, right? So you might lose your employment if you're an academic, where you lose your job. It also affects your job application. This kind of misconduct, where employers would push you down because of this kind of misconduct. You can have revocation of professional licenses for those who are in the medical field or those who are in the health sciences. Also, the reputation damage that may happen to you. You might suffer a reputation damage involving falsification of that is accruing from the falsification of research data. You might also have legal consequences. You might be sued for using other people's work, right? That's another issue that also comes on, or the erosion of personal integrity and trust among mentors or your colleagues within the same field that you find yourself in. So, but now let's move beyond the consequences of academic misconduct. Let's talk about the issues of what the DUT plagiarism policy and AI policy says about these kind of issues of academic integrity. So there are key things that it focuses on. Number 1 is the broad definition of plagiarism, where the policy defines plagiarism as an acknowledged use of published, unpublished, or AI-generated work. So whenever you use somebody's work, you need to make sure that you acknowledge them, right? Or whenever you copy and paste AI-generated work, you need to acknowledge the use of AI. So any content produced without attribution is wholly regarded as plagiarized work. There's also a concept of self-plagiarism is also regarded as an offense, where you resubmitting your work that you have used or your previous work that you've published, and you're not disclosing that this is the work that you've published. That is also regarded as a form of self-plagiarism. Collusion, we've already mentioned collusion. It's also treated as misconduct, and the policy emphasizes that working with others on individual assignment and presenting that information as yours is also regarded as a form of misconduct. Then graduated sanction framework. The policy, the DUT applies a graduated response where first offenses may result in mark deduction. We've already mentioned that, or repeat or serious offense actually leads to expulsion, right? Progressive understanding expectation. DUT expects students to demonstrate increased mastery of academic integrity standards over time. So postgraduate students are held at a higher standards as compared to your undergraduate students. Right, so let's talk about the sanctions that the DUT offers. So there are 5 levels to DU sanctions, from warning to expulsion. The first one will be you will receive a verbal warning, right? First, minor offenses, they attract a formal warning that is recorded in a student file, right? Then the second level is the mark deduction, where you can get a 0, the deliberate or repeat misconduct. So it shows that you are actually deliberate about this kind of misconduct. Then number 3, which is the level 3, the failure of the module. You fail, serious breach affecting academic credibility. Student may fail the entire module. Then level 4, this is formal disciplinary hearing, where you'll be called. We've already mentioned that. Then the level 5 is this expansion and suspension and expulsion. Right, now let's move on to the current issue that is most people might be, or most students or scholars might be asking themselves, which is the issue of ethical use of AI in academic work. Right, so the policy allows the use of AI, various tools of AI that are available. Right, for example, your ChatGPT, your cloud, both generative and agentic AI is allowed to use. Right, but there are things that you need to adhere to, so you need to use it ethically. There are I'll go through the key do's and don'ts that a student or a researcher should not do. Right, number one, the first thing that you need to do is to acknowledge the use of AI. So any tool that you have used, right, for drafting, outlining, summarizing, or generating text must be fully disclosed. You need to disclose what have you used it for and to what extent have you used it for. Right, you need the use of AI in learning aid is also should not be a substitute of critical thinking. Right, tools are permitted by the university to support thinking. Right, for example, brainstorming, grammar checks, structuring arguments. Right, but these should not substitute your critical thinking. Right, so you should not over rely on these tools. Right, and when you over rely on these tools, it affects your critical thinking and human judgment. So you need to always be careful as to the extent that you do not over rely on these tools. Right, so you need to always make sure, a student or a researcher always need to make sure that they align use with assessment policy. Right, you need to refer to the assessment policy that the university or your lecturer has given you. If the lecturer said for this particular assessment AI tools are not allowed or generative AI is not allowed, then if you go on and use those generative tools and you do not disclose, you are guilty of an offense. So you need to make sure that you are aligning the use with the assessment policy that you've given. Right, so the things that you should not do. Right, you should not present AI output as your own original work. Right, that means submitting AI generated content as essay, for example, analysis, code, or data interpretation without disclosure. The moment you fail to disclose, right, you are guilty of a non-disclosure according to the policy. And another thing that you shouldn't do is to rely on AI for critical analysis or critical or argument development. Right, so the intellectual property remains yours, the critical thinking should remain yours, the arguments should remain yours. What the AI tools should do is for them to enhance your capabilities as a researcher or as a student, not to delegate your critical thinking or judgment to the AI tools. Another thing that you also need to make sure that you need to always at all times to verify all information that is generated by AI, because AI tools have a tendency to fabricate information, citations, and arguments. It can present to you information as in a form that you think it is accurate, but when you cross-reference and cross-check that information, you might find that that information is actually not true. It is actually not true. Right, so AI disclosure is very important, and this is what good practice is all about. So I've given you an example on the screen of what an AI disclosure is, or an example of an AI disclosure is. So you, for example, assuming that you have generated your chapter or you have used AI to enhance your chapter, right, you need to, in a methodology or an appendix at the end of the assignment, to have a disclosure of what you've done and how you've used AI. So an example would be, this chapter was drafted with the assistance of ChatGPT 4, OpenAI. Then you need to include the access date 2025 for initial structuring outline. Now you are explaining exactly what you've used AI for, and arguments, analysis, citations, and conclusions. So you are actually bringing the lecturer or the examiner to speed as to where, how, and which platform have you used. So 5 things are important when you're talking about AI disclosure. Number 1 is identifying the tool specifically. If you use ChatGPT, you need to include the version. Right, if you use Copilot, include the version. Right, provider, the date of access, and acknowledge you need to include that in the acknowledge section. Then number 2 is describe the nature of assistance. Right, this is where most students fell short. Right, because if you have used AI for everything that you've been using, or for the entire assessment, right, at the point of disclosure of how you've used it, right, you struggle, because there's no way you would say I've used AI for everything. Right, that would become over reliance on AI. So you need to make sure you say I've used AI tools or ChatGPT to generate the arguments or the structure, the themes. I've done data analysis, I've generated the themes and the codes, right? But the rest of the writing was done by me, or I've used Grammarly to edit, right? So the third thing is affirm original intellectual contribution, right? This is here where you clearly state that your analysis, your conclusions, and the arguments are your own, right? The moment you delegate your analysis, your arguments, and your conclusions to AI, then that becomes problematic in its sense, because we begin to question the issue of human judgment and critical thinking. So this distinction is very important. You need to distinguish between what the AI tools were used and what the role of the researcher or the student was in this particular place. So the fourth aspect is check your department specific policy. You need to acquaint yourself and familiarize yourself with what does the department says about a particular AI. I know in some departments they've come up with a list of AI tools that they require their students to use. So you need to familiarize yourself with the toolkit or with the tools box that the university or the department gives you to say this is the tools that are allowed and these tools here are not allowed because of the issues. I know that departments do not allow the use of AI detectors because of their false positives, right? So you need to be always sure and be at speed with what is allowed and what is not allowed. Lastly, you need to verify AI generated content before submitting it, right? So most students fall in the pitfall of doing their assessments at the last minute, and this is problematic because they tend to delegate the writing of the assignment to the generative AI tools, and in that process, when you delegate that aspect, the AI tools, they lack context. They do not know your context, where you're coming from, or they do not know what is happening in your specific context. So that information might have biases, right? So the moment you submit that work for examination to your lecturer or for examination without you verifying that work, that's where you see cases where examples that are replete in your work are examples of things that are detached from the context that you are working on, from the South African context, from the DUD context. So it is very important in that to verify all the information that ChatGPT, that Copilot, that Claude produces before you submit it for examination. So key takeaways from this presentation from Module 2 today is that academic integrity is the cornerstone of scholarly credibility. It is non-negotiable. You cannot negotiate academic integrity, right? And also plagiarism, fabrication, and falsification, collusion all carry serious academic and professional consequences that can lead to expulsion or legal consequences, right? So DUT treats AI generated content is requiring full disclosure. They do not ban AI, the use of AI, but they say disclose whenever you use it and be transparent and you need to make sure that you verify every information that you have generated from AI tools. And also they emphasize the issue of the issue of ethical use, and that do not over rely where you delegate your critical thinking and your human judgment. So in a nutshell, we're saying AI tools are permitted, they're permitted as aids, not to replace for our critical thinking and judgment. So in a nutshell, your integrity as a researcher or as a student define your professional identity long after your postgraduate qualification is earned. So it is very important that when you use AI tools, you need to use them ethically, and you need to make sure that you acknowledge or use or work that you've taken from other people's work, so that you avoid plagiarism and over reliance on AI tools. Thank you so much for taking time to go through this presentation. Again, my name is Dr. Muringa from Faculty of Arts and Design. Thank you so much.